to Andromeda, everyone. Welcome to the post-game chat, where I'm just going to have a little discussion about this whole experience we've had in Andromeda. You know, I tend to do these at the end of final episodes and stuff, but Mass Effect games have a lot to them. Or, well, big RPGs like this are very expansive. They have a lot of things to them, so I think sometimes it's just better to do a big discussion video at the end, and you know, the ending video was like nearly 2 hours long, so it's probably better to do it here. So big sigh, big exhale, it's over. And overall, man, I think that Andromeda is it was a really enjoyable experience. And I've made like a couple of pages worth of notes just to try and guide my thoughts so I'm not too scatterbrained here. And yeah, I just wanted to go through everything that we've had in this experience. And you know, I suppose that a lot of story threads in this game were meant to, or might still, get carried on in the future. Things like, you know, the response of the Ket Empire, the identity of the Jardan, and the future of the Milky Way races, the future of the Angara, what lies in the rest of the Andromeda galaxy, right? Because we've only explored one cluster, albeit a very large cluster, which is why it was identified in the first place. But yeah, there's a lot of possibilities, a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of mysteries that follow on from this story. So I think that in terms of my experience, while I've definitely enjoyed the I'd say the soul or the core of the experience, right? I think that the core of a game like this is, you know, the main characters, the lore and the mythos that you gain from reading around a lot of the things in the game, and the concepts that you get presented with, the moral dilemmas, the sci-fi concepts that get interwoven, are really what I enjoyed about the original trilogy. You know, things like artificial intelligence, consciousness, existentialism, religion within a sci-fi concept, the intergalactic politics, and then narrow that down to the more personal stories we have about, you know, about friendship, about love, about nationalism, about culture, about traditions and things like that. And then you have the historical and discovery element. And I feel like those are the core core principles of what I would say a Mass Effect game is. And I think a lot of them, and those things are what I still enjoyed in Andromeda ultimately. I think that the Andromeda has a lot more problems than at least my experience had in the Legendary Edition. In terms of, it's not in terms of, oh, the originals had a lot more DLC, you know, it's not about bugs and glitches. I think that there are certain writing and structural elements to the design of Andromeda that mean it gets in its own way, right? It's like that they designed this kind of awesome race course, and then they put speed bumps in it, if that makes sense. You know, like, it's supposed to be something that's fun, that you go around and you enjoy. Some bits are fast, some bits are slow, but then you put all these speed bumps in the fast sections, right? And it's like, stop getting in your own way. And I think that that's what my overall experience is. Really enjoyed the characters. I really enjoyed learning about the new races, about the new threats, the new technology, and I enjoyed all the new mysteries, the new histories, and all the sci-fi concepts. I think I enjoyed that core, but I think a lot of there's some kind of structural elements to the open world stuff, to the quest design, and to some of the dialogue writing that like I said, they feel like speed bumps, but I feel like the core experience is still great. So we'll start off. I'm going to start off with I guess what some people would come to play role-playing games for, right? And that's the characters. And I think our main cast here on the Tempest, and I am going to make some comparisons to the original trilogy, of course I am. I mean, how can you not? But I think that you have to compare Mass Effect Andromeda to Mass Effect 1, right? Because this was supposed to be the first game in a new trilogy. So, and it definitely has the Mass Effect 1 template for the whole structure of the plot. And I think in terms of our cast of characters, I think the game does a better job in terms of the cast of characters who are on the Tempest, right? Just like the cast who are on the Normandy. And I feel like everybody on the Tempest has something that you enjoy, right? There's no wasted character here, in my opinion. Whereas I feel like in Mass Effect 1, definitely Kaidan and Ashley kind of felt like they weren't great, right? And honestly, Garrus wasn't great in the first game. Garrus really comes into his own in Mass Effect 2 and 3, but in Mass Effect 1, Garrus is a little bland. It's really Tali, Liara, and Rex, and Joker as well, of course, who provide most of the flavor to the game in terms of characters on the ship. Whereas I feel like here, everyone on board the Tempest has a great character arc in their own right. They all had really enjoyable side loyalty missions, and I felt like they were all really well done. So, you know, Suvi and Callow are kind of, I don't know, would they be the replacement for Joker and Edie, I suppose? Obviously, they're not as intimately tied as Joker and Edie were in Mass Effect 3, but they were really enjoyable. I really enjoyed Callow. I wish we would have had a Solarian, you know, combat squad mate. But Callow was a great substitute, I suppose, in that sense. He was a lot more you can't really compare him to Joker. Completely different characters. Callow was a lot more insecure. He felt a lot more vulnerable, right? He was very much wondering if he'd made the right decision leaving the people he built the ship with behind, right? So he was quite vulnerable at places. He had his kind of conflict with Gil and the memory of his friends on the ship who helped build the ship. But you know, he had a cool little quirky personality. He felt Solarian. I think that's a compliment you can give him compared to someone like Director Tan, who didn't really feel Solarian, in my opinion. Whereas Callow really did feel like a Solarian. And Suvi, my main, like, Suvi ended up being our love interest in the end, our romantic option. And while we had some great conversations with her about faith, about creationism, about science, about curiosity, and I feel like there was like a huge gap in like the middle third of the game where we just heard there was no new interactions with Suvi, and I was a bit disappointed about that because her character was quite soulful, very reflective. There was just like a huge chunk in the middle of the game. Like we spoke to her initially, we learned a lot about her, about her family and her faith, and then there was this huge gap where she didn't have anything new to say until we got to that kind of final stretch of missions, and all of a sudden she was involved in locating things and adding to the missions and stuff. So I would have liked Suvi's story and interactions to have been paced a lot more reasonably, like because Callow's was. Callow had points throughout the game, I feel, but they were a cool little duo who were always on the bridge. They always had a bit of back and forth, and it was cool. So our main Asari squad mate was Peebee, and Peebee was an interesting character. She was quite a bit of she had great contrast within her character, right? Because on first impression, she's a bit... What's the right word here? She feels a bit immature, right? A bit impulsive, a bit inconsiderate to everyone else, kind of a little selfish in her kind of desire to explore. But she's also... She's like middle-aged for an Asari, right? She's kind of halfway through her life as an Asari, so it was kind of a bit of a contrast, right? I would have described her as a bit. I think I did in the playthrough. I described her as a bit of a wine mum, right? You know, a bit like not a bit uncool, but a bit awkward. Kind of says awkward things, makes everyone tense up a bit, but is also quite free in that sense, right? If that makes sense. And she had a cool, an interesting character arc, right? She kind of had her heart broken, I suppose, by Kalinda. She'd been scorned somewhat. I don't know if she had a heart broken, but she definitely felt a bit pushed away, and she'd put the barriers up. I guess that was a big part of her character arc, was feeling like she was a part of a family, a part of a group, had friends, and all that kind of thing, and breaking down those barriers. And even when those barriers did break down, she was still herself, right? She was still like this awkward, kind of bit cringy at times, but she was a great character. She always it was always nice having a little bit of comic relief with her. She was kind of the polar opposite to Jarl, who I was going to talk about next. I mean, Jarl was a fantastic character, right? Probably, arguably, the highlight of all the Tempest crew. He was a great insight into the Angara. He was a great representation of their kind of cultural ideals. We always had very soulful conversations with him because of their emotional openness, right? And obviously, because they used a similar voice spectrum to like the Protheans, to Javik at least, it felt a bit weird at first because they used that kind of slightly Jamaican accent for a lot of the Angara, so it made them kind of feel like a bit like the Protheans, but they're nothing like the Protheans in their person, or nothing like Javik at least. But we explored lots of different concepts and ideas with Jarl. He was kind of it was between him and Suvi really, who for romance options. Maybe I should have gone with Jarl because we definitely spoke with him a lot more. But I think either would have been great. But there were a lot of rich ideas and concepts with Jarl about, about family, about one's purpose, the purpose of the Angara, particularly after he learned about the Jardan and his race's creation, right? And yeah, Jarl was great. He had a kind of a sharp sense of humor. He fulfilled a similar role to Javik in certain ways because he was learning about human culture, Asari culture, humor, idioms like he'd speak about. Things were always new to him. So it's like that kind of when you were back at school and there was maybe a new kid in your class who was from abroad and they didn't speak a lot of English, right? So it had an element of that, right? You'd teach them rude jokes, or you teach them little slang phrases for things and compare them to their own culture. That's always a really enjoyable thing in sci-fi, is the things that are brand new, that are alien. And that is one element that the game, I feel like, needed to have a lot more of. We'll get to that a bit later, but Jarl was an example of that done well. It's just there might have been a bit of a lack of that in the rest of the game. But in terms of our human squad mates, is one thing that I feel like the game did a lot better than any of the games in the main trilogy, right? I mean, only really Miranda was, in terms of actual squad mates that go out on missions with us. I understand Joker was a really, really interesting character, had a lot of personality. But, Ashley, Caden, what is it, Jacob? Jacob, Captain Muscles from the third game, James, all kind of sucked, really, at least for me. I think most people would agree that Jacob, Ashley, and Caden were kind of boring. I know some people really like James. I think James is okay. James has got a bit more personality than a lot of them, but it was only really Miranda who kind of was flying the human flag. But I think Cora, at least. Cora was a really interesting character. She had a fascinating backstory with her Asari I don't know if it was how, I can't remember what age she joined the Asari Huntresses. Maybe it was when she was 18 or 16 or something. But that was she'd always felt like a bit of an outcast, and she'd also always felt like a number two, like she was never really in charge, like she was always following someone's orders. And she was quite soulful, quite a serious character, but it was nice to see her find a bit of peace and a bit of catharsis. You know, she'd always kind of felt like a bit of an outsider, right? She was pushed out by the humans, but she never really felt truly Asari. And then she had that kind of bubble burst when the Asari, with the whole situation with the Asari Pathfinder, and maybe idolizing people a bit too much. And I really enjoyed her character arc, and she was just a cool character, right? I think Cora was really good, and I could understand why some people maybe don't like Liam. I think I went through different phases. I think at first, because he was on a mission with us and he had lots of quips, lots of kind of annoying quips about, you know, when we were in combat and stuff. But then when at first his overwhelming positivity, like, I really enjoyed. And he had a lot more background to him than anyone like Caden or Jacob or Ashley. Well, not more background, but just he reflected on it a bit more. And the thing was, even if you didn't like Liam, I think that the important point here is that him being a bit annoying or a bit like a bit hyperactive, a bit maybe a bit judgmental of other people, it was brought up by the other characters. Some of them thought he was a bit annoying, they'd get in arguments with him, they'd make jokes about him on the Tempest, and I think that was the important thing, right? If a character is a little bit stiff or boring or whatever, Liam, that doesn't describe Liam, but if the other characters actually bring that up, that makes them feel more real. I mean, and I think that was the what stopped Liam from falling into the Jacob Caden trap, was everyone else recognizing that about him within the game, and it made him feel more real, right? And I really appreciated that, and that kind of connects to Lexi as the Doctor. I think one of the things I wanted in the original trilogy was to speak to the Doctor more. We didn't get really too much from her throughout the whole trilogy. But Lexi definitely, you know, similar thing with Lexi, where she's a bit uptight, a bit stiff, a bit overly professional, protective, almost like the motherly figure of the group, trying to keep everyone healthy. Even though she's younger than Peebee, she comes across as a lot older in personality. And again, everyone mentions that. I think that's what was important here, was these personality styles were always brought up for the most part. And similar with Gil, similar sort of thing. I didn't really like him as much at first, but that was part of his personality. And again, we saw that manifest in his little rivalry, his little duel with Callow, as they struggled over how to renovate the ship. And he had a nice little arc with his friend Jill about repopulation and the pregnancy and everything. Yeah, the human characters I really enjoyed, and like I said, the ones that did have maybe some annoying traits, it was recognized within the game, and I think that was really well done. Vetra. Now, Vetra was cool. She definitely had a bit of tension about her because she's lived her life without a lot of freedom, right? She's always had to protect her younger sister, and always had to protect Sid, and she was kind of burdened with that. Like, she was carrying it around on her back all the time, which made her feel a little bit stiff at times. But I felt like she was generally a very warm personality to have around the ship, and I really enjoyed Vetra. And it was nice to see her kind of let go of her sister by the end. And she always had like a pragmatism about her, right? Because she's had to live her life that way, kind of tight purse strings, you know, making use of whatever she has. So she felt like a really kind of pragmatic, like, not sensible is the wrong word, because she definitely had a looser side to her, but, you know, like, she's always got a mind on, oh, how are we going to actually do this? And yeah, I really like Vetra. And then not lastly, I suppose, but and certainly not least, I guess my favourite, maybe my favourite, I'm not sure, but probably my favourite would be Drac, because I think one of the problems this game has at times is the cast can feel a little young. At least in the way the writing feels at times. It just feels like there's a slight lack of mature dialogue at times, but I liked the presence of Drac because he's an elderly Krogan. And it just brought a slightly different perspective, right? He's like compared to someone like Liam who wants to look to the future and establish things, and Drac's while Drac is thinking about the future in terms of Kesh and his people and the Krogan's future and everything, there's like a different feel having a much older character like this who's having his own health problems, you know, thinking about who he used to be, the mistakes that he's made, what he's left behind. And I really liked, particularly at the end, when he was talking to Lexi about his health and all the artificial parts of his body, and there was like a note of melancholy in that. And I feel like that kind of thing, at least that personal melancholy, hasn't always been present in the Krogan storylines. Like, the Krogan have always had the obvious thing to do with the genophage and their progeny and their future, but in terms of their personal reflection, it hasn't always felt I haven't always felt like that's been explored too much. You know, just like because they live so long, they're kind of indestructible. So it was a nice contrast to have a Krogan dealing with like decrepitude, essentially. And yeah, that was a cool character arc. And I guess the last character we should mention is Sam. And I think Sam is a weird one because on the one hand, I think that Sam, you think of Sam, it's fulfilling a similar role that Edie did, right, in Mass Effect 2 and 3. But I feel like Sam as a character ended up not being realised too well, and he ended up kind of being a bit of a tutorial voice, a bit overbearing. His presence is felt way too much throughout the game. He's always telling you what to do. He kind of feels like Die Hardman in Death Stranding, where you can't do anything without his voice popping up and telling you what to do and making sure you do this, don't forget that. And I feel like his character arc is an artificial intelligence that's supplemented by human experience, almost the symbiotic experience that he has, wasn't explored enough. And the Angaran ancient AI that we ended up saving would have been a good opportunity to explore that, but they didn't really capitalize on that too well, I don't feel. But I think that the Angaran AI was optional. You might not have brought it back to the ship, so maybe that's why. Yeah. So Sam, it's a weird one. I feel like he was overutilized massively. It just felt like there was too much hand-holding because he was a giant. It made parts of the game feel like a giant tutorial because he was like, do this, do that. It was like, oh, come on, mate, just let me figure out for myself, or let the other characters tell me what to do for a bit. And I realized, like, at the end of the game we had that section without Sam, and that was actually really good. But we've got a squad with us, there's always going to be someone to remind us of something. Let them do it a few times and not always be Sam. So I feel like they definitely overplayed Sam. It got a little bit tiring in places. I mean, we even installed a mod that made him talk less in certain sections of the game. And then I guess we can talk about Ryder, her or himself. And it is a weird one because I feel like Andromeda feels like a bit less of a role-playing game than the originals did. I don't feel like that's too much of a stretch. Because, you know, when we start Mass Effect 1, we pick all of our backgrounds, our military history, and and that kind of defines who we are, a bit of our reputation, where we come from. Some side quests are defined by that. But the problem here is Ryder has all that defined already. We've got her father and her brother and her mother are important parts of her story. So it makes it feel like less of a role-playing game in that sense. And I feel like the storyline with Alec Ryder and Ellen Ryder and everything didn't have the impact it maybe was supposed to. didn't really have much emotional resonance because the main experience we had of our father, of Sarah's father, of Alec, was him sacrificing himself to save us. And whereas I feel like the game was pushing us more towards, oh, you didn't get on with your father, he was a bit estranged and stuff. And I don't think as the player we ever really felt that. So it's a bit of a mixed bag in that sense, because they what was forsaken were the role playing elements, and what we gained was a more tailored story, but one that ultimately I think fell a bit flat in terms of Ryder's personal story. In terms of like, I feel like the core characters are done really well, but I think that there's like a huge drop off when it comes to the supporting cast in terms of particularly the Nexus. Every single person on the Nexus as a character was a bit of a letdown. I can't really remember enjoying any conversations that I had on the Nexus. And I understand that the Nexus was probably just supposed to be a replicant of the Citadel, right? And the Nexus Council represented the Citadel Council, and in the original games they were always a pain in the arse. They always stopped us doing what we wanted to do. They were a hindrance. But I don't feel there was any need to necessarily replicate that. And yeah, we'll get to side quest characters and stuff a bit later. What I will say is, I've noticed it in other games, but sometimes with these big RPGs, it feels painfully clear that there are two writing teams. There's like the main characters, main plot writing team, and then you have a side quest team. And sometimes there's just there's not enough crossover between those teams, and that's what it felt like here to me. It felt like the side quest team just filled quests in. There was not really much thought put into them, into their design, into their character arcs, into a lot of them, in terms of not the allies and relationship missions, but everything else just felt like kind of by the numbers, very bland character wise. But we'll get to that kind of stuff a bit later. So yeah, that's our kind of friends and colleagues kind of area in terms of characters. But then what about the villains? What about the mysteries that we were faced with? So I guess we'll start with the Ket as our main antagonist. And I suppose the obvious thing to say about the Ket would be that they're a little one-dimensional in terms of personality. But I feel like as we went throughout the game, their presence became more and more interesting as we learned about the Ket Empire, right? That they span pretty much the whole of the galaxy. The Archon isn't the main guy. We haven't just all of a sudden been introduced to the main guy. He's just like a general almost. And that looming presence of the Ket, as we learnt more about it, became more and more and more interesting. Kind of like the first half of the game, I wasn't really sure how I felt about the Ket, but the more we learned, and then once we discovered the exaltation process and the kind of religious, almost shamanic element of exaltation, with the kind of indoctrination side of it, where they were kind of educated to believe in the principles of it, that being quite sinister, almost dystopic, right? And then there were all the future implications of a looming war with the Ket Empire, and all that involves became interesting. But I think in terms of them as individual characters, I don't think you can really say much about them because we didn't really get to talk to them on that level. They weren't really driven. The Ket were driven by higher non-personal principles, right? So it's very difficult to connect with a villain on that level. He's interested in Remnant, the Primus is interested in exaltation and nothing else. So yeah, it's a weird one, but it became more and more interesting as the game went along, for sure. I really enjoyed the aesthetic of the Ket, the more industrial style of their ships, right? The more mechanical kind of stripped back metallic aesthetic, in contrast to the kind of clean and more like electronic and more like modernized and developed technology of the initiative, was like a real interesting contrast that I enjoyed as an aesthetic, right? The kind of brute force of the Ket then being more focused on biology, us being more focused on technology. It was a really cool contrast. I really enjoyed that. And then both of those things were contrasted to the Remnant or the Jardan. And I don't think it would be too much of an exaggeration to say that the Remnant architecture was the most like intriguing and awe-inspiring aesthetic highlight of the game for me. I mean, the first time we went into the Remnant Vault and we saw the kind of city of pyramids that were in there and the spectacle of it all, it was breathtaking, right? And I mean, I'll never forget that first experience of going in a Remnant Vault. It was awesome, right? The clean lines, the black and neon, the triangles everywhere. It was fascinating, and I really will remember when we were on Eladin and we drove through that tunnel into the derelict Remnant starship that had crashed in the desert. I mean, the scale of it was just it was fascinating, right? I was a little bit disappointed we didn't get some more specifics about the Jardan. I mean, we really don't know, if they were a biological species, if they were similar to the Angarans, if they were a synthetic race, or if it was simply an AI, right? The Jardan could have just been a singular sorry, I keep shaking the camera. Could have just been a singular entity, right? And I guess they were saving a lot of this stuff for future games. So obviously this might have been realized. They've teased a lot of this stuff throughout. We got a few big reveals, and obviously I guess the Ket kind of take the place of the Reapers here in terms of the overall threat. We get a glimpse into them with the Archon, but we know that there's a much bigger threat looming further afield. And then I guess the Remnant and the Jardan take the place of the Protheans, right? The long lost advanced species who've left a lot of technology behind that we're finding in dribs and drabs. With obvious differences being the Ket are a lot more fallible than the Reapers, but they're a biological enemy, not an artificial enemy, which is a cool contrast. And then the Jardan kind of seem like they might be a race of AIs. So I guess they kind of flipped that as opposed to the Reapers and the Protheans. And then I guess the other main kind of villain of the game, which was probably one of the most disappointing things in the game, were the Exiles, right? I'll talk about this a bit more later, but the Exiles as a presence, taking up so much story in the game, was a major disappointment, because we've come to Andromeda, right? And you don't come to Andromeda to deal with, well, you can't, I'm sure this would be a possibility, right, given the circumstances, but to have to deal with Milky Way races as a problem, to have to negotiate with the Krogan again, to have to deal with like Mass Effect 2 style like renegades and criminals and crime rings and Reyes and all that bollocks. It was just boring, man. And because there was nothing new about it, right? Like the Ket and the Remnant and the Angara were new. It was new. So a big part of these games is discovery, is like learning about the kind of zany science and the cultural histories of everything. And the Exiles was just like an unwelcome distraction from that, and me personally, I just found it annoying. If anything, they just could have replaced all the Exiles with Rokar. There could have been like a more substantial sect of Angarans that we had to deal with, instead of dealing with the Exiles, Sloane Kelly and Reyes and Morda with the Krogan. It was all just kind of boring, because it felt like stuff we dealt with in the original trilogy. Yes, what I would have preferred, I just would have preferred more new races. I understand that we're only in one cluster, you know, Helios could have been like the last refuge for all these races from the Ket. So you could have had other races, maybe that weren't native to Helios, maybe they'd moved in because they were on the run from the Ket. And I just feel like an important part, particularly like in Mass Effect 1, was learning about all these races, about their cultural histories, about the conflicts that existed between them, about their lifespans, their biology, their personality traits, right? I mean, I could reel off stuff about, you know, however many races we encountered in the Milky Way, and here we only really get the Angara, who we know anything about in detail. We learn a bit about the Ket, but nothing too deep, not in extreme detail. And the Jardan and the Remnant is still a massive mystery, so it feels like a bit of a missed opportunity here, because I think that the original games showed that you can have like whole species and races that exist on the periphery of the story. Like, what's his name? Frogface. What's his name? Kalahira. I've forgotten his name. You know who I mean, anyway. The guy who passed away from because he had that terminal illness. In we meet him in Mass Effect 2, right? How have I'm forgetting everyone's name. You know, they existed on the periphery. We only encountered like a handful of frog guys. I'm gonna Google that right now. Zane? Is it Zane? Thane Krios, right. Yeah, the Drell. So yeah, the Drell are like a really good example of that you can have a race you don't really see in large numbers, but you still get to learn about, and it lets you pad out the mythos and the lore and the culture of everything. And that's a bit lacking here, because there's only really the Angara, and although the Angara exist in kind of separate worlds that aren't necessarily connected to each other, it just feels like a bit of a missed opportunity to me. And like right at the end, we learned about 3 other races that the Ket have exalted or are used as slaves and stuff, and there could have just been a few of them scattered in to meet that just that would have added to the kind of, not the melting pot, I hate that phrase, but the, you know, to the wonderment of being in a new galaxy, and it not just being surrounded by Asari and Krogan and Solarians and all the rest of it. But in terms of like the lore and the codex, they were still really engrossing parts of the game. It adds lots of extra depth when you read through the codex and you explore the histories of the Angara and the Ket and learn about the circumstances here. But I feel like I didn't read fully the codex because there was so much about Milky Way stuff in there that, like, why am I going to read through this again? Why am I going to read about the Asari and the Krogan and the Turians all over again when we've already kind of been through all over that stuff? So again, that kind of reiterates my point that it would have been nice to have at least maybe just 2 more races, and they could have been tourists just like we were, right? So the next point I wanted to talk about was kind of the overarching plot and structure of the game. So I think you can look at the overall story that they've designed here, and you can either enjoy the familiarity of it, or I feel like you can really criticize the lack of originality in certain elements of it. So I feel like the game has very large parallels and similarities to Mass Effect 1 in terms of the structure, and for me that did make it still feel like a Mass Effect game. But considering we've come to a new galaxy, you could see this as a major negative, because it's a missed opportunity to take more risks, to structure the game completely differently. So, the Nexus is the citadel. We have a council who are a pain in the arse and hinder us at every opportunity. We're a Pathfinder, similar to a Spectre. There's this big looming entity called the Ket, similar to the Reapers, and the Archon is kind of Seren here. We have this mysterious species who we're benefiting from the technology of, the Protheans. But here it's the Remnant, and like the parallels are there to Mass Effect 1 with lots of differences. I'm not saying it's the same, but I think that it just depends on you. This could have been an opportunity to really do something different, but I guess given their time constraints, they needed to have like a surefire structure for this story. So I feel like that's a personal thing. It might. I think you could see this as a missed opportunity to tell a more original style of story rather than relying on that structure, like I said, from Mass Effect 1. But I think you could see it either way. So in terms of like the writing, I do feel like the writing for the most part was good, but it does feel a little less mature in places, particularly with side characters. On the Nexus and stuff, feels a little less polished, and yeah, outside of our Tempest crew, who are very well realised and fleshed out and have really satisfying character arcs, the rest, a lot of the other cast, the staff on the Nexus, were consistently annoying and frustrating to talk to. Or I'd only really say the Moshai was one of the only side non-Tempest characters who I really enjoyed talking to a lot. But yeah, it's the writing is a mixed bag. Like I said, to me it feels like the game has different teams working on it. The side quest has one team that's clearly less experienced, and then the main stuff is written by a more experienced team of writers. And I know that most of the original writers were not still at Bioware by this point, so yeah, it's a mixed bag, but the main stuff feels great. The side stuff doesn't feel well written at all. So in terms of like the gameplay, I mean, the gameplay is best in series, right? More polished, faster, more variety. Obviously, I can't really say too much about the gameplay because I think I said this at the end of the Legendary Edition. I'm not really into third-person shooters that much. I'll play them, but I enjoy hard games of a certain genre, right? But I just don't have the brain for games that are this fast. So as a result of me playing the game on normal, I don't think I can really offer too much of an opinion on the gameplay. I think the playing on a harder difficulty and maybe utilizing a non-melee build, you would need to utilize much better tactics, much better squad dynamics and tactics to take on some of the more challenging gameplay sections. But the gameplay, it's a cover-based shooter, right? It's much better than the original trilogy. But I think as a result of me playing the game on normal, just trying to blast my way through, I prefer melee combat games. Like if you watch my Ghost of Tsushima playthrough, I played that game on whatever the maximum difficulty was, and I loved every second of it. But it's fast, but it's more deliberate. Whereas for me, that the chaos of, particularly because it's a squad-based combat as well, so you have to control other characters. Like, I don't think I function well under that kind of pace of ranged combat. So that's just me. So, and as a result of that, I think I kind of tuned out of the crafting system past a certain point. I do think that objectively, I think that the menus and the UI are a mess. I do think that they're a mess. All the stuff we pick up, I can't remember any of it. It all kind of blurred into one. I never picked up any loot and was like, whoa, what that? Oh god, that's amazing. And plenty of RPGs fall into this trap, where you're just picking up all this nonsense and you have no idea what any of it is. And I feel like with repeat playthroughs, you become more aware of stuff like that. I know like The Witcher 3 definitely had this kind of problem where there was so much junk to pick up, it was difficult to parse, which was in what was important, what was junk, what would I need, but then with repeat playthroughs, you know, when you pick up some dimeritium, you know how like important that is. So I imagine maybe this would be similar. Maybe I don't know if there's New Game Plus or whatever. So again, that was a bit lost on me, I think. But I do think that the UI is a mess. Like it takes like 4 clicks to get out of the menu, and that's just a pain in the arse. That's just a time waste, right? So if you're in the journal on a quest, you've got to exit that journal, the sub journal, exit the journal, exit the menu, and then exit the pause menu. So it's like 4 clicks. You can't just press J again and get out of the menu. And the game is full of things like that. Just little annoyances that build up, right? But in terms of the way the game looks, I mean, it's a beautiful game, right? Particularly at a distance. I feel like the views, the vistas, the architecture and stuff is stunning. I feel like the obvious criticism is the character models being heavily reused, the crappy hair textures and the like bright primary colours of the hair and stuff. Break immersion a bit, but in terms of the views on the planets, the cutscenes for landing the Tempest, the Remnant architecture, my days, it's just so good. It's joyful to explore, and that is an important part of a Mass Effect game, right? Is finding this new stuff, exploring, being like at the tip of the spear for finding this stuff, and that was great. So yeah, the game is beautiful. The animations are good. I appreciated that. There was no kind of stiff animations like from the original trilogy. Locomotion and everything was generally like enjoyable to move around the game. There was the performance was still a bit iffy. Obviously, at release, I think you guys had told me the game was quite buggy. Had some facial animation problems and stuff. So a lot of that was gone for me, but I did still experience some glitches, quite a lot of frame rate, FPS drops in certain areas, like on the Tempest when I went into that central hub area. Like I've got a 3070, because I'm playing on YouTube, I lock the game at 60 FPS, so my graphics card was really only ever around 60-70% running the game. But then you go in certain areas, my graphics card would just freak out, 99%, 30 FPS. It was just a bit all over the place at times. And from what I understand, I know you guys have mentioned like Frostbite engine being a bit of a nightmare for the developers, and making things a lot more difficult. It's not suited to third-person games like this. But it is what it is. They did well with what they had. The game looks stunning at a distance, but it still has a few performance problems in terms of frame rate and stuff, I think. Okay, so I'm going to move on to like my main problem with the game, and the main problem with the game is the quest design and the quest structure. And I've seen like I feel like I've really enjoyed talking to most people in the comments about this game. I feel like we've just generally enjoyed the game. Whenever I've gotten a bit frustrated with the side quests, we've all just had a bit of a giggle about it and got on with it. But the idea that it was like this in the original trilogy is I feel like that's nonsense. I feel like although there were fetch quests in the original trilogy, it didn't have the same level design as this, so you can't really compare it, right? I feel like the biggest problem that this game has is that it feels like an open world game, but it isn't. So I feel like having the 2 layers of open world, so you have the galaxy map, which is one open world, right? You go anywhere you want. You fly your ship around to whichever star system, you go in it, you explore the planets, and then you have the second layer, which are the 5 or 6 main areas. And it's just so frustrating to navigate it all, because there's a million different loading screens that are unskippable between each one. It's not as if this game came out 10 years ago, right? This came out in 2017, 2018. So I feel like you could optimize the game to be able to skip a lot of these cutscenes, particularly with the quest design here, because quest design, just you go to someone, they tell you to get some nonsense, and you go there, and then you go there and it's not there, then you have to go somewhere else that's on another planet that you have to sit through 4 different loading screens just to get near. You get to that, and then then it's not there either, and then you have to do that 5 more times, and then you get the thing and it's over. And that happens so many times with in particular with the side quests, but it happens in the main quest quite a bit as well. At least it happens in the relationships and allies kind of quests, and it's just it really builds up to the point where you feel like you're just having your time wasted over and over and over, and they don't cover them up. So I understand that all RPGs have fetch quests and points of interest, but there are ways of masking them in interesting and engaging ways. You saturate them with story and lore, interesting characters. That never happens in these side quests. Or you make them fun to dance around, right? And the game doesn't do that at all. Like, I tried to write down a bunch of examples of just small things they could have varied, that could have changed up the quests. So first, we never had any temporary companions, right? So, like when we ran into, it's supposed to be Zaid's son, right, on Eos. Right, he tells us where the Ket base is and everything, helps us blow up all the stuff. Why doesn't he just come with us? He can come with us and he can tell us all sorts of zany stories about being a mercenary, right? And it covers up the going around checkpoints, killing a bunch of Ket with a bit of dialogue and a bit of back and forth. He can just come with us. Why not do that? There were never any temporary companions. There were loads of opportunities for it, and it just would help break up the monotony a little bit. They should have condensed some of these missions to one planet or to one area, right? There were so many quests where you had to visit like every single planet in the game. That's like 28 loading screens between you and the end of the quests, and just condense it, have it all happen in one area, right? You know, would have been much simpler and less frustrating for the player. I feel like that a lot of these side quests were just low stakes. You know, personal stakes in these quests where someone's life is really on the line and you really care about them needed to, you know, it just didn't feel like it was utilized too much. And that what didn't help that was the lack of the dynamic camera in these side quests. So like when we're on the Tempest and we go and talk to PB or Jarl or whoever, we get a dynamic camera, right, that changes angles, zooms in, zooms out, you know, focuses on certain facial expressions. And none of the side quests have it. It was a static camera, and I feel like that was a big mistake. And I know that that's a lot of work to implement that for side quests, but I know that like The Witcher 3, I remember one of the developers talking about, they had a dynamic camera for every single quest, more or less. Even like going to talk to a shop vendor had dynamic cameras, and they said that they used an algorithm for it. For quests they didn't have time to like personally direct the camera, they had an algorithm for it. And the dynamic camera would have really helped draw you in to some of these, where sometimes when they're just giving you a quest, they're talking at you, it just goes in one ear and out the other. I feel like there were a lot of simple fun things that they just didn't implement on these big maps. Like for example, one of the strongest, like one of the best designed things in the game is the Nomad. Right, the Nomad handles like a dream. It can go almost anywhere. It can go fast. It can climb. It can turn sharply. You can upgrade it. But there are no chase sequences. There are no races. Like who designs a car that handles a vehicle that handles that well, that can jump off cliffs, is indestructible essentially, and you don't put any races or chase sequences in your game. That's such an easy win. Right? That's such an easy win. Let's have a race. Let's have races on the map, right? You've got to have fun at some point in these open worlds, but no, we have to make our own fun with the Nomad. So that was such an easy win. The locomotion and stuff when you're on foot is good. Why didn't they have any like more challenging platforming and traversal puzzles in the game? Again, such an easy win for some of these quests. Like you think, oh, I go here, it's a bit boring. Oh, but there's this cool climbing puzzle or platforming section. You know, because you can jump and dash and everything and make a combination. That's a relatively easy win. And there were no mini games. We had the one mini game with the Sudoku, but putting in some more mini games to help chop up these side quests would have really helped. And there should, I've already said this, but there needed to be more missions without Sam. It was a simple, they could have taught the way around it, you know, oh, we've had the signal cut off, you can't hear Sam for this mission. And so you've got to work things out yourself, or you've got to rely on one of your squad mates to help you with something. And I feel like they definitely fell into the trap of designing open worlds before designing quests. I won't keep consistently mentioning The Witcher 3, but I remember one of the developers saying that they had even though because they hadn't designed an open world game before The Witcher 3, but they had this policy of designing a quest and its location first, and then they'd find a way of squeezing that into the map, and then they'd change like the landscape around to fit the quest. Whereas this game feels like they just designed a full map and everything in it, and then they've designed the quests around it, and it doesn't feel right that way. Everything feels a bit more generic that way. Yeah, so they should have designed maybe some more bespoke areas to fit the quests, I feel. But again, some of this ties into the rushed development of the game, I understand that. But I feel like some of these are such simple, fun things to implement in a game, like races, like platforming sections, a few mini games, the dynamic camera, checkpoints in one area instead of spread across different planets, some more high stakes and decisions, life and death decisions over certain side characters, just would engage you a bit more rather than it always being multiple checkpoints, go back to quest giver, that's it. And yeah, like I said, I think that this is there's a mix of this being rushed, which you can blame EA for, of course you can, but some of this is just simple bad design, I think, with the side quests. It can't all be blamed on rushed development, because like I think some of those things are pretty simple ways of making bland quests, which exist in all RPGs, more fun. And the consequence of this is the game feels too long. I feel like this game's like 20 hours too long. I was clocked at 75 bloody hours by the end. And don't get me wrong, all open world games or semi-open world games struggle with pacing at some point to a certain degree, but I don't think that a Mass Effect is a proper open world game. It's like a hybrid. So to have these big open world planets, I know that Mass Effect 1 had it as well, but they took it out of and didn't put it back in Mass Effect 2 and 3 for a reason, I guess. Because it's just too easy to zip around with nothing to do, almost, and just go to checkpoints. You need to fill it with fun stuff. But most of the side quests are just they're not fun to go to, besides the combat, and most of them don't have engaging characters. Again, just as a reminder, I'm talking about the side quests. I'm not talking about the main quests or the loyalty missions. Those were all fun. But yeah, I'm bashing this point over the head, but it's the most frustrating thing in the game. Like, examples of this, like in Ghost of Tsushima, right? That map is filled with points of interest and question marks, but most of them they have a distinct like enjoyment to each one, whether you are doing a climbing puzzle, whether you play a little mini game, whether you write a poem, right, a nice bit of reflection, whether you chase a fox to a point of interest, a simple joy, whether you do a little chopping puzzle, right, simple, you get a little stat boost for it, or you find some cool loot, you find like a new sword sheath, like they're all just points of interest, right? You just go to this place, get this thing. But they all have a simple joy, and they're all different in that way, right? There's like 7 or 8 different styles of point of interest in Ghost of Tsushima. So, like, I remember when that game came out, people would criticize it, saying, "Oh, it's got Ubisoft designed points of interest." And no, it doesn't, because it has points of interest, but they all have a fun little thing around them. Whether it's a nice bit of story, emotional reflection, whether it's like a fun mini game, whether it's a cool spectacle after you climb up a big cliff, or just the simple joy of chasing a cute animal through the woods, right? Little things that help vary it up. Or like in Death Stranding, that's like fetch quest the game, but because of the traversal, you have to think about it and it's fun, right? You have lots of things to consider. That becomes a huge part of it. So whereas there's, like I said, there's no races, there's no major platforming sections. So it could have done with that. Or you have like The Witcher 3, where all the side quests are drenched in interesting characters and lore. And even the simple thing, like in the tutorial set area of The Witcher 3, where you have to go and get that old woman's frying pan, right? Sounds ridiculous. Why would you do that? But within that story is a story about Tala from The Witcher 1, who's a spy, and 2 spies have met there, and one of them ends up killing the other, and then you read the notes, and then you find out about who they're working for, about the war of spies between Temeria and Nilfgaard, and like a stupid little quest like that that's just go and get a frying pan becomes like an awesome tale of spycraft, right? So those are like 3 examples I tried to think of about either story, either fun, cute mini games and cosmetics, or interesting traversal in Death Stranding. And the idea that I'm singling this out because people told me there was grindy side quests is ridiculous, because I've gotten annoyed about side quests like this in other games. Go and watch my Final Fantasy VII Remake playthrough. I've thought about deleting that playthrough several times because I get so angry with the game at times because it has these exact style fetch quests in that are pointless, man. I'm getting annoyed thinking about the side quests in that game, but that game reeked of having 2 teams, of having a side quest team and a main quest team, and the side quest team was shit. They did nothing interesting with the quests. Nier Automata, a fantastic game with an amazing story, great concepts, awesome sci-fi stuff. The side quests were crap for the most part. Fetch quests. So I'm not singling out Andromeda for this. This is an experience you get in other games, other good games. Like Final Fantasy VII Remake, most people really like. I didn't really like it. But Nier Automata, even though my playthrough doesn't exist anymore, I love that game to bits. I love Nier Automata, but the side quests were a pain in the arse. So it's the same thing here, man. And ultimately, I never thought I'd say this, but I think the sign that the quests are annoying is that I would have preferred there to be a mini-map. And I don't like mini-maps mostly in games. Like Ghost of Tsushima and Death Stranding are open world games that don't have a mini-map. And they do it really well because they give you ways of actually looking at the world to navigate. But here, it was just laden with checkpoints. Okay, I don't want to make this video too long. I know it's like an hour long already, but I feel like you get the gist. I've really enjoyed my experience, but the time wasting that is present in this game definitely affects your enjoyment a little bit. And I really do understand why some of you have said you bounced off this game. You got like a third in and you just got hit with a wall of side quests and you stopped playing the game. And I can understand that. It doesn't mean that it's a bad game, but it gets in its own way. If they would have made this game shorter, it would have been to its benefit. If they would have cut out a lot of that nonsense and made it a shorter game, it would have been better for it, because the the main aspects of this game are polished and well done, right? The cutscenes, that fight scene at the end is breathtaking. And yeah, overall, I've enjoyed the experience. It delivered in the areas that I want from a Mass Effect game, and it delivered in the same areas that most of the same areas that I enjoyed in the Legendary Edition, in terms of a great crew of characters, awesome sci-fi concepts, moral dilemmas, and awesome lore about, about fictional species, planets, histories, and all that stuff. And there were great spectacles along the way with fantastic architecture, and beautiful scenery that just made you stop and take a look. That's what I enjoy about a Mass Effect game, and it does all those things pretty well. But I would understand if you thought the plot mirrored Mass Effect 1 a bit too much, but that's a personal preference thing. In my opinion, I just would have liked to have seen a few more Helios alien races. That's my main criticism of the story. I wanted more races. But if you cut the silly side quest design out of this game, it's great, and I had a thoroughly enjoyable time. I originally intended this to be a 2-part review where I was going to offer all my thoughts like I've just done, and then go away, read reviews and stuff, and come back and see what I thought. But I don't really care what games journalists have to say. I mean, most of the time, yeah, I don't want to get into that, but I'm not going to do that. This is my unfiltered, unmolested opinion of Mass Effect Andromeda. The advice I had before the game, I think, was pretty accurate, and that hasn't influenced my opinion in any way. If anything, I did way more side quests than I wanted to, or that I should have done. I should have followed that advice a lot closer based on my experience. I hope that they create some sort of sequel to this game. The groundwork they've laid is solid. They can iron out a lot of these mistakes with a bit more time. They can add in way more alien races. They can get rid of all the silly fetch quests, and they can streamline it a touch more. And they should do this. And yeah, I hope that they utilize it in some way. I mean, the easiest way, right? If they really think that Mass Effect Andromeda wasn't a success, and it's got too much negativity surrounding it, then all they need to do is have a time jump, right? Where Ryder's story isn't going to continue. We jump maybe 100 years in the future. Helios is settled. The Ket have disappeared. They've been pushed back. And now the initiative, after establishing cities and everything in Helios, is ready to go to the rest of Andromeda, and the real war with the Ket is about to kick off. That'd be the simple way around it, right? Oh, we don't want to carry on Ryder's story because there's too much negativity around the release of this game, but the game itself is fine. They just need to do a time jump, in my opinion. I mean, they did a 2-year time jump between Mass Effect 1 and 2. This would need to be more significant, in my opinion. But you could re-explore Helios that way if the cities had been built, and then you could go to the rest of Andromeda for this big epic war with the Ket, discovering who the Jardan are and meeting all these other alien races who've been exalted. So I hope that they capitalize on the lore and the base that they've built here, but who knows? We can only hope. You guys will have to tell me what you think, what the rumors are about a possible sequel, whether they've completely canned it, I'm not sure. So this has been a great playthrough, guys. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope we can just celebrate the game and have a giggle about the rough edges and not take it like painfully seriously, because I don't like territorial arguments about this stuff. I just like to discuss what it actually is and not get like frustrated about it. So yeah, those are my thoughts about Mass Effect Andromeda. I hope you enjoyed this series. Let me know your thoughts down below. If you enjoyed this discussion video, leave me a like, and just remember, everybody, never trust an on crate. I'll see you next time.